All right.
Welcome,
Well,
everyone.
oh, sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Welcome to Career Conversations, a program of the APH ConnectCenter and Career Connect. As folks get into the room, we're going to get started here in just a moment. My name is Richard Rutha. I am the digital content manager, and today we have a very special guest we'll be interviewing, as well as you in just a few moments. Katie, who is behind the scenes, thank you, is getting our paperwork all in order, and we're getting those digital ACVREP credits in our team's wiki. So we're getting that sorted out, and so when she has that, we will give you the opening code as well as all the other information you need, and then we'll get started. Also on the panel with me is our newest addition to Career Connect, Lori Scharf, who's also going to be helping out with this career conversations and future career conversations. Normally, these are on the first Thursdays of each month. We will resume on November 3rd, and we have a very special interesting person who will be with us on November 3rd, and I'll tease that out in just a minute. And going forward, Lori will be hosting career conversations as we expand our team. So Lori, you want to say hello?
Good evening to everybody and welcome.
All right. And we have about 47 participants in the room, pretty exciting. We have this evening, I'm on the West Coast, so it's a little interesting for me to say evening. We have with us a very special guest, and we go to my notes here. We have the Inclusive Innovation Lead who works with NASA. Her name is Denna Lambert. For some of you, she is no stranger at APH. I believe it was 2016, correct me if I'm wrong, Denna, you were our guest speaker at our annual meeting.
Yes.
And I was reading up on some of the blogs that we have written about you back then and now. And we'll be putting those blogs up in the chat for those of you who are new to Denna and her career, what that is all about. So Dina, good afternoon and welcome to Career Conversations.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right, so the idea is here, we're going to get started. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about who you are. And maybe after that question, Katie would have the opening code, which if you are putting that in the chat, we will have that for you. So tell us a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do with NASA?
Okay, so I am currently living in the Washington, D.C. area, specifically Greenbelt, Maryland, and I've been living here for almost 20 years, working at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. I started out as a contract specialist at Goddard, which is one of the 10 field centers for NASA. And throughout my career, I've been able to kind of take on different roles. And most recently, I was selected to serve as the Inclusive Innovation Lead for the Space Technology Mission Directorate. And essentially what we're doing is making sure, ensuring that we are making our investments, our funding opportunities like grants and contracts as inclusive, and ensuring that we have as much accessibility and equity of experience for those that want to participate in NASA's space technology. So if people have ideas, if businesses have ideas, researchers, students, we want to say, come one, come all, come bring all the crazy ideas you have in technology and concepts. And that's where we make our investments that lead on to our larger missions, like James Webb or the DART mission that was just recently debuted last week.
Wow, very exciting and very interesting. And hello, everybody. Once again, you are tuned in to Career Conversations. Our guest is Denna Lambert with NASA, and we are excited to have her. In just a few minutes, we're going to ask you all to put questions in the chat box, and we will be fielding some of those questions. And if you are calling in on the telephone and you need to raise your hand, we can open the mic and have you ask your question. That's the whole idea behind Career Conversations as we monthly interview working blind professionals. I'm going to stop here and check with Katie. Are we good with the codes, or do you need a little more time?
We are getting very close, but just give me about another minute.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Again, career conversations, and I'm going to ask you, Dana. So what are some of the unique technologies that you as a working blind professional use on your job to do your job, to do it as independently as possible, to be productive in the workplace? So can you shine some light on that?
Well, I would say that it has kind of evolved and changed over time. So when I started with NASA Goddard back in 2004 as a contract specialist, even back then, and we all know that technology has evolved and changed like so much. It accelerates from year to year. But when I started in 2004, much of NASA's procurements were essentially done by paper and by hand. So, I had to kind of go back to the basics of either using some type of OCR Kurzweil software back in the day, and utilizing, readers whenever I could, using kind of office products to, create spreadsheets to keep track of budgets and that sort of thing. But when I was managing some contracts that, dealt with either layouts or kind of structures, then I would rely on some tactile graphics. Some of it was very basic and rudimentary, using either WikiSticks or some, embossed Braille software so that I could get a better sense of what, we were asking contractors to do, because my responsibility was to work with our technical community to develop the requirements for our contracts. And so it's evolved over time to where if I am working with scientists, and we're looking at large amounts of data, I may be using some of the SaaS kind of audio add-ons or plugins that will convert graphic data into kind of an audio output. I do have some remaining vision, so I'll use Zoom text whenever I can, but for me, using Braille and tactile graphics combined with some kind of enlargement is like the best for me. What I'm finding now, that I'm dealing more so with our program execs and developing, solicitations and technical topics. A lot of it is documents, whether it's PDFs or Word documents, not so much of like really specialized engineering software. As you kind of progress in your career, I think, at least what I found is that, the needs change. So being able to adapt and come up with different solutions that work at different points is like the best thing. But also kind of knowing what is the best use of my time.
Sure.
And that I work with a group that likes to make very beautiful presentations and convey information visually, but that would be an enormous task for me to do. But synthesizing information, figuring out how to communicate it, that, or relationship building, connection, that is my superpower. So being able to kind of not so much of downplaying what my accessibility needs are, because that's something I definitely don't think should be done, but more so highlighting what my strengths are and how that can benefit the whole group has really helped with kind of, allowing me to kind of navigate around some of the accessible challenges that may and still do exist. So
I'm going to stop
I hope that answers your question.
No, that's great. We're going to stop right there and pause the recording so Katie can give out
Yes.
the codes.
All right.
Okay, so and no, that really was a good question and good feedback. And I know we're already getting questions in the chat, so I'm going to actually take it over to Lori and see if Lori, who again, Lori Scharf, welcome to Career Conversations. She will be hosting future career conversations as our Career Connect team expands. Lori, welcome. What question would you like to ask Denna?
Okay, fabulous. So you mentioned time management, and could you talk a little about maybe how you make decisions on accessing material and how it would impact time management? I think time management can be something that people struggle with, and I think access and how you access things can also impact the way you access things. And maybe you could talk a little about how you make decisions in that area. Thank you.
Yeah, I it's definitely taking on this type of role with STMD. What I've found is that a lot of meetings, occur in the mornings. And I know that a lot of folks will, do multitasking while they're in meetings, but when you're using speech, having to listen in on an audio call as well as listening to your screen reader, I have not gotten all that great at that. So what I've done is started to kind of block off time in my day in the afternoons to really be able to sit quiet with the work that actually needs to get done or that follows some of the meetings from the day, and then kind of look at, okay, is note taking during a meeting my strength? Sometimes it is. Sometimes I may ask some of my team members to kind of rotate that task of note taking, so that either I can be more engaged with facilitating a meeting, or someone else can, and we kind of share that responsibility so that it doesn't always fall on one person. But if I know that it's I'm going to need to kind of access a document that is pretty in depth with graphs or pictures or images, then that's where I would like enlist some support from another colleague to say, hey, I know we need to go through this together. I'll go through as much as I can, but can we set aside some time to kind of work through it and collaborate together? I try to present kind of the need for information as a means of collaborating, because there is a lot of richness and goodness that comes from those types of conversations. It definitely is a challenge when you don't know how much you're missing, and that definitely is a conversation I've had to have with my supervisor to say, hey, sometimes I may not know what I'm missing.
I love that point.
It's really important that there is kind of a level of trust that she can come to me and say, hey, Denna, I think there may be some points that you need to kind of be aware of that may have come through in a certain document that I just wasn't able to access. And I guess there's a bit of vulnerability that happens, but that's where I try to do the best that I can to shine in other areas so that I'm always adding value when there are those moments that I kind of need a bit of extra support. And that's the whole process of learning what an inclusive work environment looks like, that we all need to play on our strengths and then support each other's when there are challenges. But honestly, going back to your question of time management, it changes all the time. So it's always, I think, a learning opportunity. It's not so much of a I've arrived at a expert level of understanding of how to manage my time. It changes with different organization. It changes depending on the time of year, depending on the workflow.
Fantastic. Lori, I might have you go up with a follow-up question. Katie, in just a minute, we're going to get ready for the chat. And again, if you're joining, welcome to Career Conversations with Denna Lambert, who is with us from NASA, having a fascinating conversation so far. And again, the idea is we're interviewing working blind professionals from all walks of life. And we encourage you, our audience, and some of you have already, putting your questions in the chat, which we will address in just a moment. Or if you want to raise your hand and ask it, we'll try to do that as well. We prefer the chat. And so we'll get ready for that in just a minute. Lori, if you had a follow-up question, you're free to go with it. Oh.
No, I
There you go.
just wanted to say I really did like, though, that you talked about sometimes not knowing what you're missing. And I think that's important for people to remember. And it's can be a skill that you work on developing. How to better understand material and how to ask questions to get the information you want. And I'm sure that's something you've developed with your colleagues over the years.
Yeah, and it's definitely, I think when I first started out in my job, almost 20 years ago, I don't think I would have had that level of, I don't know if it's called confidence or if it's a sense of security in being vulnerable in that way. Because, definitely there's always this urge that I must have the most accessible information right at my fingertips that I can access, independently. But, I know, and this is a challenge, that I know that there is always going to be an information system that is not going to be quite accessible or usable or perfectly 508 compliance. And definitely we need organizations and companies to fight for ensuring that accessibility is there. I think just over time, I know that I would get exhausted by fighting those fights. And so that's where I think it was kind of a give and take of, as I gained more experience. I think one thing that my current supervisor, and even my previous one kind of appreciated is me coming to them with specific ways that they can support me, because they're not familiar with blindness and all of its intricacies. But if I give them really practical things that they can do, whether it is setting a culture where you try to send presentations or materials ahead of time, for everyone to review, not just me, or providing notes, afterwards for everyone, or even for those of us, that are parents and have to work sometimes asynchronously, of providing recordings for meetings. It becomes, easier for them to become more of an ally, instead of us relying on people that just don't know what to do, fight a fight for us, if that makes sense. So.
Fantastic. Again, we are here with Career Conversations, Denna Lambert, who is the Inclusive Innovation Lead with NASA, or Space Technology Mission Director at NASA. I'm getting that down. And I know we've got questions in the chat. Katie, do we want to start with some questions?
Absolutely, yes. Keep those questions coming. It's great to see all this interaction. So lots of good questions coming up for you, Denna. We have one person here who is part of the NASA Roads Challenge, and she has they have a team of visually impaired students, grades 3 to 12.
Awesome.
And they're going to be learning about the moon. I want to come. But the question is, asking if you'd be willing to Zoom with the group of students and talk about how visually impaired adults could work for NASA.
Yeah, awesome. I would definitely make my schedule work to make that happen. So definitely get in touch with me. I can drop my work email in the chat, or you can also find me on LinkedIn at I think I have to remember my tagline, but if you search for my name, Denna, Benna, Lambert, LAMB as in boy, ERT, then I should come up.
Fantastic. There you go. Great
Great.
networking. It works.
Absolutely. So then next we have, when you move to a new area, do you have someone, do you explore it on your own, or do you have some orientation to that new area?
Yeah, so actually when I first moved to the area, so I applied for this job, or I applied for my first job with NASA in January of 2004. And I originally made the first contact in May of 2003, but NASA didn't reach out to me until like January, and I didn't hear back until almost May of 2004. So it definitely, that sort of speaks to that, hey, you never know when kind of your opportunity will come up, but just keep persevering and sticking with it. But getting to your question, so I had reached out to Voc Rehab and said, hey, here are the things that I would really love some help with, whether it is orientation mobility hours. I also was able to send a message to employees at Goddard to ask them, hey, what are some good areas to live in, to get some suggestions there and do some kind of networking with them. So when I first moved here, I think vocational rehab paid for, maybe it was like 10 or 20 hours of O&M to kind of learn the bus routes. And our NASA facilities are almost like college campuses with, winding, sidewalks and streets and crossings and such. So it was like learning a college campus. But over time, we all know that O&M service is not free, and Voc Rehab does not have unlimited money. So over time, I did have to kind of find a coworker or even another NASA intern who was willing to, give some time and show me around. And that's where it took kind of teaching someone on the fly how to convey information to me. So, getting them to know like, hey, in directions, it's helpful if you're able to say, we're coming up to a turn in 5 feet, or this room looks like, a bunch of tables and chairs and whatever, so that I did not have to always rely on someone with very specialized skill sets, but I could kind of use someone who is probably more available to me, that I could, gain an awareness. And then honestly, over time, I would have to just set time in my schedule just to explore and kind of look lost and look like, some people would come up to me and say, hey, do you need some help? And I would say, hey, I'm just trying to figure out, what I'm doing here and where I'm going. But if you want to know how to help me, tell me what's around me, just so that they don't walk away, always feeling like they're, being rejected. So I hope that helps to answer your question.
Awesome. We have a question wondering what your thoughts are on, do you think NASA will hire astronauts who are blind or may have other disabilities?
Well, that is a very interesting question. So we know that I almost have to like proverbially take my NASA badge off so I can speak more as a person rather than an employee. But we know that commercial space flight is opening a lot of avenues for hopefully not just the wealthy to access space flight and exploration. And so with that coming about with SpaceX, with Virgin Galactic, Blue Origins, they are not applying the same standards that NASA uses for its astronaut corps or commercial crew corps. So that does open the opportunity a bit for people with disabilities to start exploring beyond Earth's orbit. There is a wonderful organization, Astro Access, who is that I was selected recently for their Flight 2 crew, where we are actually tackling some of the practical challenges that people with disabilities would face in a micro G environment. So we will be doing our second flight December 14th, where we're actually, doing some, experiments to say, okay, how do you keep orientation in a micro G environment? Is it how are you able to communicate in a micro G environment? Just a whole list of things. I would say that the European Space Agency is a bit step ahead of our own space agency, meaning NASA, because they have made plans for a para-astronaut program. I think they are just starting out with those with either missing limbs or kind of height differences. So we haven't gotten into the sensory disabilities as of yet. But again, we got to start somewhere. And I believe ESA is taking that step forward in tandem with Astro Access, tackling some of the, kind of what are the foundational things that we need to address so that we can safely and effectively go into space flight with all different types of abilities.
I have a follow-up question. Can you briefly talk about what that flight simulation will be like? And is there a way or a good resource for us to follow you and those folks on that adventure, on that experience?
So Astro Access, I believe it is astroaccess.org is the website. And what they're doing, some people may have heard of the term vomit comet. That's where you get in a plane, you go up to about 50,000-60,000 feet, the plane, drops, you get a chance to simulate kind of lunar or Martian, level of weightlessness or Martian gravity, which is, less than, Earth's gravity. And then you finally get to a point in the parabolics, kind of the up and down, slopes of getting to a 0G gravity. So unfortunately, those increments are about 30 seconds long. So the experiments have to be very quick and snappy. But there's about, 20 to 30 of those in a flight, depending on kind of how much space we have to play around in the, airspace. But they're doing multiple flights per year, and they've actually gotten, kind of engagement from, MIT, some academic universities who are interested in pursuing this line of research. I know myself, I am advocating for NASA to start investing in research that promotes accessibility of spaceflight for people with disabilities.
Very cool.
That's kind of my own personal mission.
Yes.
While I'm in this role. So yeah, and I am toying around with posting it, either on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, Twitter, or not Twitter, but TikTok. TikTok isn't always the most accessible, but
popular though, but you're right.
It's becoming popular, so I need to figure it out.
So do I.
So yeah, I'm trying to capture as much of it as possible. I am working with NASA's comms team to kind of figure out the best way to kind of package it so that, it tells a story of what we're doing.
That is
Fantastic.
outstanding. All right. So we have someone here who is starting his career exploration early. We have Alexander, who is 9 years old, and he has some great questions. So wondering what led you to work for NASA, and then also wondering if you wanted to be an astronaut or want to be an astronaut. So kudos to Alexander for asking great questions and starting this exploration path early.
Oh my goodness, hearing about you, Alexander, that always makes me so excited, because I know that the path and journey is going to be exciting for you coming up, and hopefully what I pray is easier than what kind of with each generation of students coming along that we hope that it's easier. I always had kind of an inclination with, taking things apart, trying to figure out, why do we hear certain things, between radio frequencies. So I had a lot of interest in electrical engineering, as a kid. And I think my teachers, I attended public schools. So my teachers, they were really interested in trying to make sure that I could access as much of the content as possible. Some of it we did have to go outside of the school system to figure it out, whether it was at the School for the Blind or relying on my TVI to kind of help connect the dots for some of my teachers, as well as kind of finding mentors within engineering societies. So those are really great resources. Now we have things like the NASA Space Grant Consortium, who are, a lot of them are connected to universities that provide science and STEM opportunities for students within your state. And then now we also have the NASA Express newsletter, which each week provides content for you to get involved with, and things that you can kind of participate in challenges or even as a team, even remotely. So as far as being an astronaut, I think, yeah, that was on my things I would love to do. I think this Astro Access is kind of the closest thing I may get to it, but who knows? I think once we are able to see more blind people or people with disabilities doing even things like Astro Access, it kind of opens the gate a bit more to think, well, what else can we do? And so for you, Alexander, what I hope is that, as you get older, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that you can push that envelope a bit more. And maybe, let's say, European Space Agency, maybe even NASA is kind of open the door to say, hey, we want candidates with disabilities to apply to our core. Even if it's not NASA, if it's SpaceX or someone else, I would say, be bold enough to apply, and know your craft as well. Be good at the area that you want to research in, but also, don't count yourself out.
By far, you're the youngest audience member we've had on Career Conversations, so kudos.
Absolutely. And kind of a follow-up, we have a question here asking if you have been visually impaired all your life, and or if you lost your vision while employed with NASA. So just talking a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, so I've been blind since birth. My dad, and it runs in my family. I have congenital cataracts. And so my parents knew that I would likely be blind. So I was able to receive intervention services fairly early on. And so growing up, I was able to use like a large print. I had, recorded, textbooks. This was before digital books were available. So I had cassette tapes. You'll have to ask somebody what that is. But what I've noticed is that over time, I don't want to say that my vision has worsened. It's just because I am having to enter into so many different spaces. I know where my vision is helpful and where it is not. So that's where I have to be, I guess, able to adapt to, if I can use my remaining vision for navigating or for reading something quickly on a screen, that's great. But I also know that I can have skills of navigating with, voiceover or with JAWS, or using Braille as a backup if I need to. It's just that, my vision can change depending on how tired I am, or if it's really bright outside, or if I'm having pressure spikes from, glaucoma.
All right.
That's something that you learned to cope with as a young adult, or did you find, as you matured and did more things within your career that you learned how to develop those skills? Or I'm just
I
curious
think,
as to.
I think so in the way back in the 80s and 90s,
I know those
think,
days.
yeah.
I resemble
there
that.
wasn't, there wasn't as much encouragement for low vision kids to learn Braille. And it's been definitely interesting to talk with some of my TVIs, and say, hey, why didn't we pursue Braille more? So it was kind of, I used large print and I used, audio recording, and then I couldn't read my own handwriting. So, I learned how to type, very early on. But I also had friends who were Braille users and who were totally blind or didn't have enough, usable vision. And I kind of saw that they could read books without having to squint very hard, or they were a lot more comfortable. They weren't as exhausted with reading like I was. So I had kind of a compare and contrast experience with my friends to say, hey, there may be some other tools out there that are better or could be used so that I won't be as exhausted. So I did have to learn those skills a little bit later than what, I think is available now. So if there are, kids or teachers who have kids with some remaining vision or low vision, I would definitely say, please, as early as possible, start incorporating those Braille skills so that you have them. I know that my reading speed is very much slower than what it would have been if I had learned it earlier. So it is something I've had to acquire over time that I did find benefit, but it kind of came about from interacting and having friends that did use different techniques than I did, that had different experiences with exhaustion or fatigue or, eye pain.
You are participating in Career Conversations with Denna Lambert, who is with NASA, and she's a working blind professional. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we are addressing them. We've got about 15 more minutes, so let's ask away.
All right. Well, we have some people, a couple of questions, wondering if you could talk a little bit about your educational background that has led you to NASA.
Okay, cool. So, so early on, I would say, because a lot of students will start picking, getting, tracked, depending on what classes you're able to take. So I was able to take like, geometry, algebra, and a little bit of calculus in high school, and physics and chemistry, and in the AP courses in high school. And that kind of set me up for being able to enter in the engineering program at the University of Arkansas. And so with that, what I definitely, looking back, I wish I could do things, differently. I ran into a lot of challenges. And I'm so glad that now we're having, these kinds of conversations. We know more about who's in the field, who can serve as mentors. But when I was going through my program, and I was facing a lot of doubt about, can a blind person be an engineer or a scientist? There was no internet to really reach out and find folks. So unfortunately, when I did get discouraged, and when there's not people that look like you who have the same challenges, I did switch my major from electrical engineering to business, but I took enough math courses to complete a minor with that. But thankfully with NASA, there's all kinds of career tracks that you can take, both technical and non-technical. So definitely, while my interest still is in the technical area, I was able to kind of weave in the business acumen that came with the degree that I did graduate with, and then kind of interface with our technical community. Now that I'm in NASA, we do have blind folks who are engineers, electrical engineers, computer engineers, systems engineers, that, you know, have been able to kind of pave the way, you know, for us there. And it, you know, let's say I retire early, you know, get a lot of money at some point, maybe I'll go back and finish it. So we'll have to kind of, if there's any savvy finance investment folks out there that can clue me in on how to, you know, set a nest egg for Dina's re-education fund, then I would love to do that.
Great. And along those lines of your education, someone is wondering about how many hours you took of classes a semester. Were you a full-time student, and did you have any struggles in college in terms of?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. It's bringing back so many memories. So when I was having conversations with our disability support services office, the director there recommended that, you know, I start out with, you know, 12 hours, 12 credit hours, which I think at the time was the minimum of being a full-time student. And then, but some of the engineering classes and STEM classes kind of required that you, depending on how they stack them, would be like 15 or 16 hours, credit hours, because some hours or some classes were worth 4 credits versus 3. That is where I think, because the time it took to access information, and having to use readers and that sort of thing, looking back, I think there was maybe a bit of wisdom in taking a lighter load, because I just didn't have a very efficient means of accessing information. That's when I was really relying on the vision that I had, and I was having trouble with, you know, kind of keeping up. There was a semester that I did take 18 hours, because I wanted to finish up on time. So going back, I probably would have started out and maintained the lighter load, you know, going into college, because if you're transitioning from an environment where you have a TVI who is, you know, supporting you from class to class, or a para, and you're going into a college environment, which is very different, where you have to do most of the advocating and sometimes the accommodating yourself or with your department, that does take a bit of bandwidth that you may just want to be mindful of when you're selecting classes. So there is nothing wrong with college taking more than 4 years. And that's where I do think having voc rehab to help supplement some funding, so that if it takes you 4.5 or 5 years to finish, that is okay, if it helps you to keep doing well in your classes.
Great advice. Next, we have a question here from Dash, who is starting their career exploration early again, a 10-year-old student, and with a great question here, asking, what life skills do you need to do your job?
Oh my goodness. Is it Generation Alpha? Is that the
Right.
name of this generation? Y'all are like coming through tonight.
Right.
Right.
So for my 9 and 10-year-olds, y'all are coming with it. So with life skills, I think one thing that my TVI did a great job in is she involved me with my IEP plan, and discussions very early on. I remember being in 3rd grade going to my IEP meetings. And I know IEP meetings can be very, you know, contentious at times. But what it did is that it allowed me to understand what my role was in determining and setting my goals for myself. She even had me start thinking about, the classes that I wanted to take earlier than maybe my peers, so that we could have conversations with the professor or the teachers and professors, so that I could ask for books and order them through APH. And I think Learning Ally before it became Learning Ally. And so as I started towards 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I had more skills in advocating for myself, knowing the logistics behind setting up my own accommodations. And then now in my career field, I'm able to have these conversations about my disability or accessibilities in a concise way, in an understandable way, so that it positions me more as being proactive rather than reactionary. But also good orientation and mobility skills. Last week, my boss asked if I could go to a conference in DC. I had never been there before. And so being confident enough to go into unfamiliar places, being able to ask directions, know when and how to use, sighted guide or assistance, having a guide dog or a cane for navigating. Those are all really good skills to have. And then just definitely independent living skills. I have my own home, and my cooking is getting better. So I definitely would advocate for setting aside time as part of your education plan for getting blindness training. Because I know in a lot of school settings, you just aren't able to get to all of those skills in the day with a rehab instructor or your TVI. That attending a blindness training center would be great for really honing your skills in Braille, independent living, money management, that sort of thing, because they all kind of come together as you become an adult.
Wow, that's great advice. We have a question asking, what advice would you give to young students who are interested in pursuing careers in the areas of STEM, the science, technology, engineering, and math? And also along that line, do you have any advice for TVIs working with those students interested in those career paths?
I think what I've learned along the way is that many of the solutions and answers that we need, whether it is blindness specific or not, may or may not come within the blind community. And I say that kind of tongue in cheek, in that it is incredibly important to have an extensive network of blind adults and mentors and peers. But it is also really important to start networking with professionals in the field who can become like your own village. So if it's like connecting with a chapter of chemical engineers or physicists, or being a part of a robotics team and having a faculty advisor who can kind of shepherd you along the way, that really helps. I know for myself, before I applied for this job, I was kind of doubting whether I could do this job. Like, this is, $350 million of funding, and these are really technical, experts in their field. How am I going to jump in? And I felt like I counted myself out before I even submitted the application. And we know that as women, sometimes we tend to do that. But for men, it's easier for them to, kind of champion the skills that they have. So I would say never diminish, the skills that you do have as a blind person to bring forth. And you never know. Some of the opportunities that you're going to have may be unpaid. So that's where, while you're young, saving up and being very frugal so that you can, take on some of those volunteer assignments that lead on to paid assignments, but also getting exposure to, professors and other students and mentors along the way that can kind of let you know of opportunities that are coming up that would be a great fit just for you.
We've got time for maybe one more short question, and then we have to do some wrap up. Again, Denna Lambert, thank you so much here with NASA. It's always a pleasure interviewing you. I had you on a few years ago on my other program with Careers Plus. So thank you so much. Katie, do we have one or two short questions or questions that we could anything left in the chat?
Sure. So we have a question again about the from someone who's 11. So we're getting a lot of
9, 10, 11. All right.
There we go.
I love it. I really do.
Yes. So asking again, I think you touched on this a little bit earlier, but about when NASA might accept blind astronauts. So maybe you could share the Astro access or
yeah, I would say keep an eye out for opportunities like Astro Access, and keep an eye out on the para astronaut programs. As we are, moving forward as an agency with the Artemis missions, with kind of building a crew that will work on the moon, I think that's going to open up. I would probably say 15 to 20 years, maybe, with the rate of acceleration with technology and what's happening now, maybe 15 to 20 years, maybe a little bit longer.
All right. One more question, Katie. I know there's
All
plenty in
right.
there.
Yes.
And Denna, you can put your email in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah. So the question is, have you seen anyone with a dual diagnosis, such as autism and visual impairment, either, maybe working at NASA or part of any of the space initiatives that you're speaking about?
There's sometimes a running joke, and I don't know if this is in good taste or in poor taste, but what the answer, the short answer to that is yes. What we find in the technical community is there are a number of NASA employees who are somewhere along the autism spectrum. And I think as a society, we become more aware of neurodiversity and how people interact and process information. That's going to become much more accepted and prevalent in the field. So yes, combining it with blindness, it's a bit more of a challenge, but not an impossibility. There were a number of students that came through our internship programs that did have multiple disabilities, and including autism, and those students were definitely the best at what they did. They just did it a bit differently.
Denna, once again, thank you so much with NASA doing amazing things, doing awesome things, and balancing it all out with all your antidotes. Thank you so much. I put the information to some of the career blogs we've written about you in the chat, as well as your LinkedIn profile. Feel free to drop in your email so folks can reach you. If you like this, we will do it again in 2 weeks on November 3rd. We're meeting blind embalmer. Yes, she works in the funeral home and she's blind.
Whoa!
Her name is Cassie McNabb. So, and Lori will be leading that. And hopefully, if I'm not traveling too far from my conference, I'll be able to make it as well. So tune in for that. Registration is up. If you got the email for this, you'll get the email for that. Thank you for listening for Career Conversations. If you're waiting for the codes, we're going to do that in just a second. Any last word, Lori? Anything you want to say to Denna before we
I just wanted to mention that APH does have an accessibility STEM kit. So teachers should be
Yes.
aware of that.
Good stuff. Thank you for the
And
reminder.
that might even be able to be used in like a college setting to some extent.
Fantastic.
Yeah, awesome products always from APH.
All right. That wraps it up. Katie, back to you with closing codes.